It gives me great pleasure to introduce our political consultant for this evening. This is Mr. Thomas Lawson on the screen. Thomas has been engaged in politics and public policy in and around the capital of California for 13 years. He has expertise in legislative advocacy, campaign strategy, and the implementation of effective communication strategies. He is the president of the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition, and it's the only California trade association advocating on the behalf of natural gas since 2016. Thomas is also the vice president of marketing for We Vote. Thomas honed his policy skills while working at the state capitol, both for the Assembly and the Senate. In the Assembly, while serving three speakers, Speaker Nunez, Bass, and Perez, he developed and implemented public affairs strategies for members of the Democratic caucus. Also, on the behalf of the Speaker's office, he would analyze, track, and counsel caucus members on the committee floor for legislation. He sharpened his political campaign skills on several assembly races, culminating as the field director for the Buchanan for State Assembly re-election campaign in 2010. By putting together and executing a multifaceted voter outreach plan, Assemblywoman Joan Buchanan won her re-election to the Assembly by 7 points. Again, 7 points. Every vote counts. As the CNGVC vice president, Thomas works with coalition members of natural gas, vehicle, and engine manufacturers, utilities, fuel providers, and fleet operations to define the needs and priorities with legislators and regulators to shape policies that succeed in boosting alternative fuel and vehicle use. Before joining the Central California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition, Thomas was the director of the Office of Legislative Affairs for California Attorney General Kamala D. Harris. Thomas served as a high-level policy advisor to the Attorney General and senior staff, successfully navigating over 60 sponsored and supported bills through the legislative process. While serving as her liaison with the legislature and the governor's office, he was able to orchestrate an additional budget allocation of $9.4 million for the Department of Justice Special Operation Units. Thomas was asked to serve as the Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Kathleen Galgiani after leading her to victory during one of the most targeted races in 2012. As campaign manager for Galgiani for the state Senate, he oversaw all aspects of the campaign organization, including 2 campaign offices, one in Stockton, one in Modesto. He developed a targeted strategy or voter outreach plan. Thomas led Galgiani's campaign to a 1.1-point victory, one of the smallest margins of victories in recent memory. With no further ado, let me introduce you to Mr. Thomas Lawson, political consultant. Tom, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with everyone. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I look forward to these types of discussions and opportunities. I believe strongly that education is important. And I have had the experience of being able to combine politics and policy in my background. And I think that the ballot initiatives actually do both. They are policy that they use a political means of getting on the ballot and a political campaign to pass. And they're very difficult to change. And in California, we usually have a lot of them, and a lot of money is spent on both sides. So it's hard to keep track of what is being said, what is true, what is not true. So the goal today is not to tell people to vote one way or the other. The goal today is not to support one proposition or the other. The goal is to try to educate and provide a little bit more background to kind of what these propositions will do, and more importantly, what a yes vote will do and what a no vote will do as it relates to what's in front of you. There are 12 propositions on this ballot, and that presents quite a bit of challenge for voters to be able to educate themselves to know what's going on. So I'm going to go out of order here a little bit, just because I think some of them are a little bit more important and maybe a little bit more confusing. And then we'll get into some of the other ones as we go forward. So I'm going to start with Proposition 25. California Proposition 25 is named the Replace Cash Bail with a Risk Assessment Referendum. That important point about this proposition is a referendum, which means it is trying to overturn a law passed by the legislature. So a yes vote and a no vote means something different in this context. So the legislature passed SB 10, which actually overturned cash bail, which means cash bail at this particular point is not a valid way that we're system that we're using in our criminal justice system. There were some folks during that legislative process that were on the opposition, and there were some folks in support. The folks in opposition to SB 10 use the systems that we have in place to put a referendum on the ballot. So if you vote yes on Proposition 25, you are actually voting to support SB 10, which is the law of the land right now, which overturns cash bail. If you vote no on Proposition 10, then you're actually repealing SB 10 and repealing the ban on cash bail and going back to what we were before, which is cash bail being the tool that we're using in our criminal justice system. So that's very important, because that's going to be completely different when we get into the yes and no's of all these other ones. So a yes vote upholds the overturning of cash bail, which is the law SB 10, and a no vote restores cash bail. So I think it's important to just highlight that. For those that don't know, cash bail is part of the criminal justice system. If you get charged with a crime, it is the opportunity of the judge or the prosecution to determine whether or not you are a flight risk. There is a very interesting point that I think is important that is being talked about, and it's around this issue of a computer algorithm, right? Proposition 25 overturns, and SB 10 talks a lot about using a risk assessment, which are developed and approved by the State Judicial Council, which is made up of the Supreme Court Justice, the Attorney General, and some other folks that are in the criminal justice system, to determine which one of those risk assessments are going to be used. And it allows a tiered system. So you're at low risk, medium risk, high risk. That's what SB 10 has allowed. And is there a question? I'm sorry. So the other part about SB 10, which is important, is that it currently exempts certain misdemeanors from needing a risk assessment to be released. One of the issues that I think is important is there is a discrepancy, and we're going to get into some of these other ones, because a lot of these criminal justice propositions deal with this interplay between what's a misdemeanor and what's a felony, and whether or not those should be changed or counted. And so we'll get into some of those later on. But that's an important piece of what SB 10 does, which is it takes away that the ability to be able to label someone a high risk if it's just a misdemeanor. So there are quite a few people on both sides of this. There's a lot of money being spent on this, and I think it's important to highlight, who's financing, what side, and I think just to give a little bit of color, there is quite a bit of elected officials from the Democratic Party in support of this, and as well as some of the labor unions and organizations like the Medical Association and Next Gen California. On the other side, on the no side, you do have some bail bondsman companies, which are small businesses here, but you also have quite a bit of money being spent from insurance companies who basically ensure these bail industries. And I think that's just an important note to know, that most people don't know that they're involved. People think that this is, you know, union versus, you know, bail bondsman, but it's a little bit deeper than that. So I think that those are just some of the important points that I want to highlight. And again, I just want to say, if you're voting yes on this, you are voting to continue the elimination of cash bail, and voting no means restoring cash bail because it is a referendum. So I wanted to highlight those. And a large portion of some of this data and information should be available in your booklet that you're going to get from the Secretary of State, where it's going to get into some of these details. Now, you can imagine that booklet is going to be pretty large with 12 propositions. So hopefully this provides you a little bit more information on ones that may pique your interest, that you may want to dig a little deeper on. The next proposition I'm going to talk about is Proposition 20. That is the Criminal Sentencing, Parole, and DNA Collection Initiative. It's important to know that this one does a lot of different things. So there's 3 separate buckets here that deal with criminal sentencing, that deal with parole, and then they deal with DNA collection. So just to start off with a highlight, a yes vote for this means that you support this initiative, which will add crimes to the list of violent felonies for which parole is restricted. It will recategorize certain types of thefts and fraud as wobblers. And a wobbler is, it gives discretion to the district attorney's office that's charging a person. A wobbler means it can either be charged as a misdemeanor or as a felony. So some of these current charges are either misdemeanors or already felonies. A wobbler allows for some discretion there. And the other,
like a screenshot of our rubric, but it just looks really.
The other issue is that, and the last piece of it is that a yes vote on this means that you are supportive of DNA collection for certain misdemeanors. A no vote means that none of this is enacted, and some of the current laws that this seeks to overturn are there, such as Prop 47, Proposition 57, which reduce some felonies to misdemeanors. I think it's important to get into some of the meat of this particular proposition because it has so many different things on it. It also, if a yes vote, will establish 2 additional types of crime in state code, serial crime and organized retail crime, and then those again will be able to be characterized as a wobbler. The reason why this is important is, just like the previous proposition, and this will be a reoccurring theme, is that some of this is an end around of the legislature. Some of these types of bills and pieces of these types of policy have gone through the legislature, or unsuccessfully have been prevented from going through the legislature. So it's important to know that some of this is being presented to the people to try to, I think, go around the legislature. And going around can be good or bad, depending on what you're trying to do. But some of this is in the purview of the legislature to use the legislative process to hash out what is good for the entire state. The other thing that I think is important is it deals with parole, and it allows a prosecutor to request a review of the board's decision. CDCR will make a determination that someone is ready to go parole. So a prosecutor who may disagree with that ruling may request a review of that board's decision. And then it also defines 51 crimes and sentence enhancements as violent, right? So Prop 47 allowed certain felonies to be misdemeanors that were nonviolent crimes. What this does is it adds to the list of violent crimes 51 types of crimes and sentences. I'm not going to go into each one, so that those would make you ineligible to be reduced from felonies to misdemeanor, but also would have an impact on your ability to make and be granted parole. There's also another piece to it, and California dealt with this a couple years ago with the 3 strikes. But there's also a provision in this one that says that it requires local probation departments to ask a judge to change the condition or status of a felon's post-release supervision, which is parole, if the felon violates supervision terms for the 3rd time. So almost similar to a 3 strikes type situation, where if you violate your supervision terms for the 3rd time, then they will ask for your parole to be changed. So that's something important to deal with. There are also quite a few people on both sides, and this one does quite a bit. The last piece that we talked about, which I think is self-explanatory, is if you are convicted for a misdemeanor, if this passes and becomes law, a yes vote does this, it allows misdemeanors to be mandated to take a DNA collection, which is not necessarily true, which doesn't happen right now. So that's only required for felonies. So if you are, so that lets you know that is a big change. And that's something that most people may not be aware of. So there's quite a bit in this proposition. The supporters of this proposition are some members of the legislature and Congress: Devin Nunes, Vince Fong, Jim Cooper, as well as the Orange County Board of Soups. And then there's some unions that are in support: Deputy Sheriffs, PORAC, which is the Police Officers Research Association, and the LA Police Protective League. And then just to give a flavor of who's on the other side, you have some philanthropists, Patty Quinlan, and then some unions: the Labor Fed, SEIU, California Teachers Association. All those are opposed to it. And you have the three divisions of the ACLU that are in opposition, as well as Equality California, League of Women Voters, and the Public Defenders Association. So that's Prop 20. There's a lot there. And it's something that I would encourage folks to take a deeper dive on your own. And I think Mr. Bivens alluded to the fact that if you have additional questions, put them in the chat, and they'll get those questions, and then we can hopefully provide some answers if folks have additional questions after we're done. Dealing with
Mr. Lawson, can we just check 1 second to see if anyone has any questions on this proposition? We'll do a last call for any questions. I don't see any. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, sir.
All right, no problem. So the next proposition is Proposition 17. This is another criminal justice proposition. This deals with restoration of a person's right to vote after they've served their time but are still on parole. California is one of 3 states that still allows for a person to, they have to finish their sentence and parole before their voting rights are restored. And so this is an attempt to, I would imagine, bring California in line with the other 47 or so states that have that. There are some folks that believe that this goes too far. Some people believe that it's right. So a yes vote means that you support a constitutional amendment, and that's important because it raises a threshold of what the percentage is for this to become law that allows someone on parole for a felony conviction to be able to vote and not have to wait till their parole is over. It's kind of pretty straightforward. It does have a lot of lasting impacts on that one, but it is pretty straightforward. Prop 21, I'll do Prop 21, and then we'll go into some questions. I see there's some questions popping up. Prop 21 is the local rent control initiative. And I think that it's important to kind of get into this one because it is it can be a little bit confusing on its face. Taking a deep dive and spending some time with these propositions over the last couple of weeks, I'm starting to become more educated, but also, I get political mail at home. I'm watching TV and getting political commercials. So it's interesting to be able to get into the actual words of the proposition and what it does versus what I'm hearing on both sides. So for Prop 21, it's a local rent control initiative. A yes vote on this proposition means that you will allow local governments to enact rent control on housing that was first occupied over 15 years ago. There's an exception that if you're a landlord who owns one or more, who owns no more than 2 homes, then you're exempt from this particular proposition. This is, from folks that may have heard some of these terms, but this kind of overturns Costa Hawkins, which is a rental housing act that was passed in 1995. There are some concerns with folks about how this proposition will impact small businesses. There's some concerns with some, how this will impact low-income housing, people who are trying to buy a home for the first time. And I think those are valid concerns. And we talked a little bit about this end around. And when you have something that goes through the legislative process that's a little bit different than initiative process, you're able to kind of hear these arguments in real time in the legislative process as it goes through policy committees and fiscal committees and debates on Senate floor. You don't have that with the propositions. And I think that that's just an important key distinction. I believe that something like this requires a lot more, debate among California about what is right, because I think that there's so much to be done here, and there's valid concerns and or issues raised on both sides, but it is before the voters and they will have to decide. It's important to note that the main opposition here is the California Apartments Association. The main supporters of this bill are Bernie Sanders, the wonderful Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and the California Democratic Party. And I know Maxine Waters personally. It's not because of her political ideations. She is a lifelong public servant. And interesting on the opposition as well is Governor Gavin Newsom. So, let's get into some of the meat of this, and I think it's important. So one of the things that it talks about, and this is in there, is what happens when you exchange, when you have all of these different homes. And I think that it's really supposed to, based on the exemption that they have, target folks that have a large amount of property. And it prevents folks from being able to raise rents on folks when they first get into a property. So the people who are for this says, if you are in an apartment and it's $800 a month, and that person decides not to renew their lease, and say rent has increased from the market value, a large portion of that, then they can then turn and rent that same apartment for X number of dollars over what it was before. This allows you to cap it at 15%, and then that 15% is spread out over the 3 years from when that apartment became available. So it basically prevents you from having this large increase in rent in an area where the rents may not all be the same. So that's what this proposition will do. If a no vote on this and you do not, the state of California doesn't pass this, then it basically is everything is the status quo. And this allows as well for folks that have had property over 15 years. So if you own property and you own more than 3 units or more, either housing or apartment building that is older, you have already been exempt from that. This opens it up for those folks to be, for these provisions to apply to them. So that's the other big change in this proposition. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what the voters do on that. I think that there's a lot being said on both sides of that, and that should be interesting. So I'll pause, Brandon, here for a moment in case there are any additional questions.
Okay, at this time, we will take any questions you may have in the chat, or please, just place them in the chat, and we'll give you opportunity to ask your question.
So Brandon, feel free to have people chime in. I know we're moving through these pretty quickly. I'm happy to answer questions. This should be a dialogue, and whatever I don't know, I definitely would like to get back to people. But I want people to be as educated as possible when they get this very large ballot that they're about to receive in the mail if you haven't already received it.
Yes, sir. That's awesome. And if I got an idea, sir, if you don't mind, how about after each prop, let's see where we're at and see if anybody want to have open dialogue with you at that time, if that's okay with you, sir.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Perfect. So Proposition 19 is the next one that we're going to get into: property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for wildfire agencies and counties, which is an amendment. So this is another proposition that does a variety of things if it is passed and signed into law, and it doesn't just do one thing. So we're going to get into what a yes vote means on this one and what a no vote means on this as well. So a yes vote support, this is a constitutional amendment as well, allows eligible homeowners to transfer their tax assessments anywhere within the state and allow tax assessments to be transferred to a more expensive home with an upward adjustment. And we're going to get into what some of this means shortly, but I want to make sure that we have the official wording so everyone has that. It increases the number of times that a person over 55 or with severe disabilities can transfer their tax assessments from 1 to 3. So right now they can only do it 1 time, and under this, if this becomes law, they can do it 3 times. And it requires the inherited homes that are not used as principal residences, which is an important distinction. So if you have a second home or a rental, for them to be reassessed at market value when transferred, and we're going to get into that. Allocate additional revenue or net savings resulting from the ballot measure to wildfire agencies and counties. So, a no vote obviously means that how we deal with transfers of tax assessment stays the same. So, how would this change what we're doing right now? So I think that it's important to know that it affects inherited properties. So if you are, if you're a grandfather, if your father or your mother, someone in your family passes down a property to you right now, this measure, if it was passed, would eliminate the ability for you to take that exemption in that inherited property, especially if it is not your principal residence. So let's just say I bought my home 10 years ago and my father and mother passed away, and now I have their home and it's in their will. It's clearly not my primary residence, and I will have to deal with that property in a separate way than I would have before. It also affects some farms, but it's important to know that the value of these homes are $1 million or more, and then there's an upward assessment that would recur, and some of this goes into a fund to help fight fires, which is causing some consternation. And I'll get into some of that political background in a little bit. So this ballot measure would allow eligible homeowners to transfer their tax assessments anywhere within the state and allow those tax assessments to be transferred to a more expensive home. And then it again increases that from 1 time to 3 times, which is an important point. The reason why I wanted to talk about the fire piece to it, because this law also, as it's dealing with tax assessments and transfers, creates the California Fire Response Fund and also the County Revenue Protection Fund. And some of the monies from these transfers, if there is a higher assessment and a higher tax, if you will, on that transfer of those taxes, that money goes into this fund, and that fund is supposed to be to reimburse counties for revenues lost, as well as to help with the suppression of fire and to help staff the fire response in those particular areas. Now, some people don't think that there is a nexus there. Some people believe that that this ballot measure was, an end around because the firefighters fought this proposition when it was on the ballot before, and it did not pass. And so they felt like it was rewritten to try to give them some incentive to stay on the sidelines, if you will. I don't really have any commentary on whether or not that's the case or not, but it is odd that in this tax issue, we have this fund being created from some of these monies to be able to go into to deal with fires. So I just wanted to give that potential a little bit of cover to everyone. And so that is Proposition 19. Brandon, I'll pause for questions.
Okay. Najee or Didi, do you see any questions for that prop?
I do not see any questions for the proposition right now.
Neither do I.
I'm gonna take a 1-minute pause. My lights here are on a timer because we're after hours. So just give me a moment and let me turn those lights on really quickly.
Yes, sir, no problem.
I'll ask a question while you're pausing, and you can answer it when you come back. if you will explain what the transfer exemption means when you come back, Tom, that would be helpful for folks that don't understand property assessments and tax exemptions and those type of things.
So again, while we're on this short intermission, I would like to remind everyone to please mute yourselves. There is a little bit of background noise, but if you could please mute yourselves, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
And the other item is we'd like to remind you to be sure and vote. And the purpose of this forum tonight is to help you become a more knowledgeable voter. Share this information with your friends, your family, and throughout the community. If you attend a church, please share it with your pastor and your church members via Zoom or email or whatever mechanism you're using if you're not, and hopefully you're not in church face to face. Tom, did you hear my question while you were addressing the lights?
I did. Thank you. I do have the lights back on so everyone can see, so I'm not in the dark here. So in California, eligible homeowners can transfer their tax assessments to a different home of the same or lesser market value, right? And which allows them to move without paying higher taxes. So for instance, if I have a home in Stockton and I bought a home in Sacramento, I can transfer what I owe, the taxes that I would owe on that Stockton home, to my new home in Sacramento. And that allows me to not have to, if for whatever reason, Sacramento area taxes were a little bit higher, I'm able to transfer that and not have to pay that difference. And, so for instance, there's exemptions for that for homeowners, obviously over 55, for folks with severe disabilities, and also for victims of natural disaster and hazardous waste. Those folks can do that. They can only do it one time. So if you're 55 or over, you can only do that one time. If this passes to become law, it extends that to 3 times. So you can actually buy 3 additional homes and have that exemption passed over.
Mhm.
This ballot measure would allow eligible homeowners to transfer that tax assessment to anywhere in the state and allow that transfer to be done for a more expensive home with an upward adjustment. And so you can severely upgrade, if you will, and have an adjustment if you transfer versus just an exemption on that property. And so this is, kind of dealing with Prop 13, but there's also another proposition that we're going to get into that is a little bit more directly dealing with Prop 13 as it relates to property taxes. But this is something that's a little bit different, and this is about the homeowner and how they transfer their property taxes from buying one home to another.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is this for primary residence or like investment properties?
Yeah, so if you are doing primary residence, then that's okay. If you are inheriting a primary residence, so for instance, you're going to move into the property that you're inheriting, then that's okay. But if this is a rental or a second home or a rental property or a second investment or third investment home, then you are not exempted from this, which means you have to pay the taxes on those. And that is something that is a big change from how we've done it before.
So in essence, this can actually affect lower income areas because they're not getting that tax money because it could be going to a different or a higher income neighborhood.
That is one potential outcome, yes.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So I would encourage homeowners, especially if you are thinking about moving anytime soon from where you are, to take a deeper dive into that one to make sure that you have a full understanding. And I'm happy to answer additional questions as we go through this and after this. So the other proposition that's on here is Proposition 15, which is a tax on commercial and industrial properties for education and local government funding. A yes vote on this supports a constitutional amendment to require commercial and industrial properties, except those zoned as commercial agriculture, to be taxed based on their market value rather than their purchase price. So as you can imagine, this sounds a little bit like something that we've dealt with before as it relates to the tax assessment, but this is a little bit different in that this is dealing with commercial property. A no vote obviously continues the current tax on commercial industrial properties based on their purchase price with an annual increase at the rate of inflation of 2% or whichever is lower. So what this is saying is that currently, if you bought a commercial building and you bought it in 2000, let's just say, you are taxed based on the market value on your purchase price in 2000, no matter what has changed from 2000 to 2020. What this proposition is attempting to change is you are going to be now taxed on the market value of that property, regardless of what you bought it for. So that's the big difference. And that money, that difference in what you pay in taxes is supposed to go into a fund to pay for education and local government types of expenditures. So, this really gets into dealing with a split roll, which is, a term that people hear. And I try not to use some of those terms because they can be confusing, because you will get a lot of mail and TV commercials and radio commercials that use some of these terms and, these 30-second sound bites. But I want to talk a little bit about I want to use actual language from the proposition, so we're not using the buzzwords, so you can kind of have an idea, okay, Prop 15 is dealing with X, Y, and Z, and not just some of these other buzzwords, because they are being used on both sides and it can be confusing. So that's the biggest issue. And, I would say that the question is, what areas have commercial real estate? That's something to think about. What local governments and education, school boards and school districts would benefit from increased taxes. If you have certain low income areas, do you have a lot of commercial property there that has to be reevaluated? Will it create an influx of this money to help, kind of create or deal with, education funding issues that some say this will do? We'll have to see. California is not a monolith state. Regions are not all the same. Cities are not all the same. So the folks on one side are saying that it's going to be a windfall of money for public schools, community colleges, local governments, and other folks are saying that it's going to drive business out of the state and prevent people from investing in commercial real estate, which is a different type of investment than residential property that we're talking about before. Any questions on that?
Can you explain what the percentages of how that money is divided between the government and the school?
I can. Sure. Thank you. So right now, 60% of the funds, if this becomes law, would be distributed to local governments. 40% would be distributed to school districts and community colleges. And so right now, some of that money comes from the general fund. This would all come from this additional revenue. And then revenue appropriated for the education would be divided as follows. So when you say that 60% of the funds goes to local government special districts and that 40% goes to school districts, community colleges, of that 40%, when you divide that pot, 11% of that 40 goes to community colleges and 89% of that 40 goes to public schools, charter schools, and county education offices. And so that's how the money would be divided up. And that would be based on the increase in money received from basically this reevaluation of commercial properties at market value and not purchase value. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us why the California Assessors Association is opposed to this proposition?
I can't speak for them specifically. I don't know.
Okay.
What their thoughts are. I think, the arguments for this is an age-old argument that we've had in California. Proposition 13, the split roll proposition, the split roll, how we do this has been something of a, you know, a shiny object that folks have been wanting to change for quite some time. I really think that when you change something this large, there's always going to be folks that are going to have questions on both sides. And I think the question that voters have to ask themselves is, am I comfortable with the status quo in this regard? If I'm not comfortable with the status quo, am I comfortable with getting everything that they say that I'm going to get? And then am I comfortable if we only get part of that or we get none of that? And what are those unintended consequences? And so it's very difficult to discern that. You're trusting that people are saying this is a good idea, and it very well may be. I'm not sure, and I can't predict the future. But I think the uneasiness that people have around this proposition, speaking on the no side, is the fear that it will have some negative attendant consequences. And other folks saying that this has to be done in order to provide this money, especially after coming through a pandemic that we just don't have access to, and this will give us new funds. And I think that that is a conversation that the voters are going to need to weigh and pick one side or the other.
Mr. Lawson, this is Najee. I have a follow-up on that, on this Prop 15. So I understand it to say 60% for local government, special districts, and then 40%. But there, I also heard that there's like some portion of it off the top that goes to the state. Is that?
Well, let me double check that before I answer. You are correct. It does not state a percentage. It does say that the state can get some of this money to supplement a decrease in revenue from the tax from the state's personal income and corporation tax due to increased tax deductions that people may use for this. But there's no percentage outlined in here. It's just some money can go to that particular purpose.
Okay.
They haven't been able to quantify how much that's going to be, but some of that money will go. I mean, I think when you look at some of this, and that to me, it sounds like more of an administrative cost of doing this, that there is going to be some, I don't know, I don't want to say holes, but you know, some push and pull about where this money goes and what money is left, and just trying to make everything whole. That's what the proposition as written is what they're trying to do.
Thank you.
Can you, Bobby, again, with a follow up to what Najee just asked, can you tell us when if the proposition passes, when the local communities will start to see a benefit of this tax, and when will taxes start to begin to increase? So I've heard something about it's supposed to help alleviate COVID and frontline workers. So when will the money start coming into communities, and at what rate, if you know?
So, you know, from my experience of working inside government, just to be quite frank, government moves very slow. If this was to become law, I think you would start to see some of that money probably early 2021. There has to be some rewriting of rules, right, in order to get some of this stuff to go. I mean, this is a law that then has to go to the locals. County assessors are probably part of that group that's saying that, you know, this is additional work that may or may not, you know, we're not going to get funded for. That is a popular argument for folks on something new and this large. So it's tough to say. And then you also have to figure out the percentages and who's going to get what. So so community college, if you will, do they have to submit some kind of paperwork in order to pull that money from these new funds, and where is this going to be deposited, and how they're going to access it? So there could be a little bit delay in creating whatever the infrastructure is to disperse this money to this group in this new way. But you should see it pretty soon, obviously, in 2021. I think one thing I'm pretty confident that if this becomes law, and those entities that are supposed to receive funds will be reminding local and state governments every day that they are due money, and they will make sure that that money gets dispersed as quickly as possible.
Mr. Thomas, this is Louise McMillan. In the pros, it says that
sorry.
it will protect. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, it's just a little muffled. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you, can you start over for me?
I said, this is Louise McMillan. This is in the Proposition 15 with the pros. It says it protects property homeowners. Can you explain how that's so?
So you said you're talking about the opposition that says it protects homeowners? Is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
I don't know how that's true. This really deals with commercial property. So I don't know how the opposition is saying that it protects homeowners. Other than if you put money into schools, those schools become viable and where people want to go. And then you get more people moving into those neighborhoods to attend those schools. But this is really dealing with commercial property. I don't really, it's hard for me to see how this affects homeowners. The homeowner proposition was the one we went over before, which really deals with how homeowners change and transfer their tax assessments. So in my opinion, I think this is really about commercial property, and it's also about the additional revenue that's generated from changing how those commercial properties are taxed.
So for edification, okay, so will the state have to, one, do assessments, and then once assessments, reassessments have been made of the properties, and then the distribution would take place. So all of these commercial ventures would have to have a new assessment. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
To determine what the taxes will be when they start collecting them?
Correct. Yeah, and that may be the additional work that the county assessor's office will be doing, because they're going to have to go out and assess all of these new, all these properties in a new amount. As you can imagine, commercial properties, a lot of them were built a while ago. They don't really go up like homes do. They've been in neighborhoods for quite some time, the industrial areas and those types of things. So you're gonna have to go out and assess every single one of those properties from all the ones that are in your jurisdiction. And then you can determine how much money is then due to the local governments from the owners of those properties. All right, we'll move along to Proposition 14, and we're coming up on an hour. I want to thank everyone for hanging with us, as we have this discussion. I think it's really important. Proposition 14 is straightforward in the sense that it basically authorizes a $5.5 billion general obligation bond. And that money is supposed to be able to fund the state's Stem Cell Research Institute, which currently is out of money. That original proposition to create that research institute passed in 2004 under Proposition 71. They have, that one created a $3 billion bond to fund this particular research. And now that institute is in need of some additional funds and money. Another important point that this proposition does is, if it's passed and signed into law, it expands the membership board or the oversight committee from 29 to 35. I think that's important. And it also caps the number of full-time employees at 70, so that most of that money is supposed to go into research. For those that don't know, the monies are designed to fund research and therapy for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, epilepsy, other brain and central nervous system diseases. And basically, this is a debt that the state will owe $5.5 billion in bonds. So the folks on one side believe that this is important this research and this public research is necessary and should be funded. On another, you have the folks that don't feel like right now is a good time to allocate or put the state in debt for another $5.5 billion. I would imagine, just to give a little bit more color, this was more than likely thought about and put on the ballot prior to the pandemic. Obviously, things have changed with the pandemic here in the spring coming into California. So that's going to be, I think, a tricky thing for Californians to swallow, I think, a bond, but it is for a good cause. And I believe that, you know, the folks that have been involved in this believe that it's a worthwhile expenditure. So it's pretty straightforward in that regard. It's not a whole lot of political folks on both sides, other than how you feel the state should be spending its debt. Any questions on that one?
No, sir, I don't see any questions in the chat. You may continue, sir.
Okay, great. Proposition 16, which is the repeal of Proposition 209, which was the affirmative action amendment. So a yes on this particular ballot supports the constitutional amendment to repeal Proposition 29, which stated that government and public institutions cannot discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to persons on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin in public employment, public education, and public contracting. So for those that were probably around a little bit before me, Proposition 29 passed in California, which basically did away with quote unquote affirmative action, which is a term that's being used. And Prop 209 is seeking to overturn that and to say, from folks that are on the yes side, not necessarily that there needs to be special consideration, but if you look at the time from then till now, have we created equality in how people are hired, how people are admitted into schools? You know, has that really happened? If it hasn't, then we need to figure out how to create some equity, right? And how do we continue to bring up the folks that have not have access? You know, there's a anecdote from someone I talked to, and that said that, you know, there are a lot of people that kids are in the UC system that may not have gotten there if they lived in different zip codes, whether or not their families are well off or not well off, whether or not they're, you know, from certain racial ethnic backgrounds, that some of this data that's being used or not used is creating a larger divide. We'll see if that's the case, and if you know, this proposition passes, if there is some change in that. And this is also one of those propositions, like some of the ones we talked about earlier, where there's a belief that if this passes, it's going to solve some problems. And then the question is whether or not it does, and whether or not this is actually the solution to the issue that we're really trying to address, which is equality in some of these areas as it relates to kind of public education, public employment, and public contracting. So I mean, I think for me, you know, when you look at it, you have to ask yourself some questions. And in those three categories, the question is, do I think that there's already equity there? If I do, then I would say that Proposition 16 is not necessary. If I think there isn't equity there in public employment, public education, public contracting, then Proposition 16 could be a remedy to that. So that's where both sides are coming from on that. And there hasn't been a lot of well-funded opposition for that, and that's important to note. It's one of the few propositions that has you know, a small amount of opposition. There has been a lot of money spent for this proposition, so that's probably why you haven't seen a lot of no on Prop 16 ads or mail in you know, in your comings and goings. Questions?
Are there any questions on this prop here?
Coming down to the end, we've got a few more left. Proposition 18, which is an interesting proposition. A yes vote on this proposition means a constitutional amendment that allows 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the general election to be able to vote in the preceding primaries or special elections. So for instance, here in California, if you're going to be 18 by November 3rd of this year, you would have been able to have voted in the presidential primary that was in March. And also there were some special elections for some seats filled. There was a congresswoman that resigned down in Southern California, and there was a special election for her seat that at 17, you'd be able to vote in those particular races. The people on the yes side believe that this is going to allow and create a stronger connection of young folks to voting and get them more involved in the voting process. The argument against it was that, you know, a 17-year-old is still a minor, so they may not be up to speed or fully understanding what they are or what they're not doing. There was also an interesting anecdote there that, you know, most 17-year-olds are still living with their parents, and it gives their parents undue influence over how and who they're going to vote for. As a parent of a 20-year-old and a 9-year-old, it's very difficult to get a 17 or 18-year-old to do what it is that you want to do, in my opinion. But I'll let other folks decide what they're going to do. So that's, you know, 18. You know, I think that on one side they feel like it's going to get more people engaged in voting. We know that young people have been historically really passionate about some of these issues. And then there is definitely a need to continue to increase their participation and registering and also in the actual voting process. So folks believe that this is a great way to do that. Any questions on that?
Don't see any questions, sir. You may continue.
All right, we've got 3 left. This one is a very interesting one. Proposition 22, which is about app-based drivers, whether or not they should be contractors or not. So we'll get into what a yes or no vote means. And then this is another one that is dealing with a bill that already passed the legislature and is in law. And so we'll get into some of those implications. A yes vote means that a person who works for an app-based transportation company will be defined as an independent contractor. And they, in the proposition, it already lists labor and wage policies specific to app-based drivers and companies. A no vote means that California Assembly Bill 5 will be used to decide whether an app-based drivers are employees or independent contractors. So just to provide a little bit of color, Assembly Bill 5, which was Assembly Bill 5 by Assemblywoman Gonzalez, went through the legislature last year and became signed into law, successfully passed that process. And it basically provided a way to gauge whether or not a person was considered an employee or independent contractor, to use that ABC rule that the Department of Labor uses, that most small businesses have to adhere to. And what the fear is from the folks on the no side, the folks that are employing these drivers and these delivery drivers, is that some of the activities will create some independent contractors, will create some employees, and then there's additional expenses that you have to are responsible for as an employee, as an employer, having an employee versus independent contractor. So this is another bill that's trying to either overturn something that was passed through the legislature. And I think that is important to take into account. So I just want to get into the 3 factors that AB 5 uses, and then I want to list the different things that this proposition wants to enact, because if, you know, once a proposition is passed in law, it's very difficult to change it. So the other part about this is, if you believe that this is the right way to go, this proposition, and the things that it says it's going to do for workers, you won't be able to change those. You won't be able to go back and make corrections or additions to that particular law. It is a high threshold thing to do to make those changes. So current law right now is AB 5, and AB 5 does a 3-factor test, which says 1, is the worker free from the hiring company's control and direction of their work? And 2, is the worker doing work that is outside the company's usual course of business? And 3, the workers engaged in establishing a trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as the work performed. Your app-based companies believe that under those definitions create more employees, and they don't think that that is the right measurement to determine whether or not these drivers and delivery drivers are employees or independent contractors. So basically, AB5 took that particular measuring stick, if you will, and applied it to app-based drivers, which prior to now had been acting as independent contractors. So your folks like DoorDash, Lyft, Uber, some of these other app-based, which we've all have used in some form of fashion, have decided they were going to spend as much money as it costs to try to overturn this. The question that we have to ask ourselves is whether or not this is the right way to go or not. I don't really know, to be honest with you. I feel like I understand from both sides. There has to be some protection for workers. There also has to be some ability for companies to be able to determine that on their own. Some of this has been the inability for both sides to be able to come together and try to hash this out. There was a lot going on when AB5 was going through the legislature, negotiations that broke down, things that were done and said on social media that created a difficult environment to have a compromise. And this is what we're left with, which is a ballot measure. I do want to list for folks, because I think it's important. There's 7 protections that the app-based drivers will get under this new law if Proposition 22 comes to pass. And so I'm going to go through these really quickly. I think we do have a little bit of time, but I think it's important to enumerate these so that people can see whether or not these meet the threshold, whether these are good enough, and whether or not there's enough there that they're giving in order to say maybe AB5 went too far or it didn't. So these are the labor and wage policies that would help drivers underneath this law. Payment for the difference between a worker's net earnings, excluding tips, and a net earnings floor based on 120% of the minimum wage applied to a driver's engaged time, and 30 cents adjusted for inflation after 2021 per engaged mile. Limiting app-based drivers from working more than 12 hours during a 24-hour period, unless that driver has been logged off for an uninterrupted 6 hours. For any driver who averages at least 24 hours per week of engaged time during a calendar quarter, requires the companies to provide healthcare subsidies equal to 80% of the average of California premium for each month. For drivers who are between 15 and 25 hours per week, that the company will provide healthcare subsidies to 41% of an average covered California premium. So if you do 25 hours or more, they'll pay 82%. If it's 15 to 25, they'll pay 41%. It also requires the company to provide and make available accident insurance of at least $1 million in medical expense and lost income resulting from injuries suffered while driving engaged on the app as defined by the company, as long as they were not engaged in personal activities. Require the occupational accident insurance to provide disability payments of 66% of a driver's average weekly earnings during the previous 4 weeks before the injury suffered, for an upwards of 104 weeks, which is about 2 years. And lastly, requires companies to provide or make available accidental death insurance for the benefit of a driver's spouse, children, or other dependents when the driver dies while using the app. Just to give a little bit of flavor of the amount of money that's been spent, on the yes side, about $184 million. On the no side, a little bit over $10 million to do that. This is also turning into a pseudo battle between tech and labor. That's another issue that voters will have to decide where they fall. Labor is saying, as their responsibility of being the spokesman for workers, if you will, that workers aren't being protected. That's why AB5 was necessary. And the app-based drivers are saying there's a different way, and we think that Proposition 22 is that. Lastly, I do want to say that the AB 5 was supposed to kick into law, and the app-based companies went to court to try to get a stay. That stay was granted, I want to say, a couple hours before a certain time, and so their AB 5 technically is on hold until the results of this election, which is just a few weeks from now. Any questions on 22?
No, sir. I had a question in regards, Mr. Lawson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I had a question in regards to the app prop in regards to is it only concentrated for those app-based the application-based that is listed like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, or are they is that proposition towards other entities?
So it's any entity that uses an app base. So I think there's like Postmates, there's Uber Eats, all of those types of I think there's Instacart, and there's all these other types of app-based services that would fall underneath that term of app-based. So anything that you have to use an app to be able to order falls underneath that category.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Someone
And
had
we do have one thing. Somebody would like to know who supports and opposes Proposition 22.
Sure. I think that a yes on 22 is being supported by the police chiefs, Peace Officers Association, State Sheriff's Association, your corporations, DoorDash, Lyft, Uber, Instacart, Postmates, your app-based services, as well as some organizations that you may be familiar with: California Chamber of Commerce, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the National Black Chamber, the state conference of the NAACP is also in support. And those opposed to Prop 22, Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris, Speaker Anthony Rendon, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, unions, California Labor Federation, Teachers Association, State Council of Laborers, SEIU, State Building and Construction Trades, Unite Here, Transportation Workers Union of America, United Food and Commercial Workers of the Western States.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Proposition 23, our second to last one.
Thomas, before you go forward, I had a follow-up question.
Yes.
So you said that there's a stay has been granted by the courts. Now, if the proposition passes, will the court's stay be lifted? And if it doesn't, will the stay be lifted? Which way will the court decision go once the election is over?
I think that the court will side with what the will of the people will be. I think that what will make it a more of a gray, sticky area is if the proposition barely passes versus passes or fails by a large margin. Then the courts will have to step in and figure out what they should do next. So I think that that has a lot to do with it. It's not just whether or not it passes or fails, but I think by how much is going to be key on what the judge decides to, or judges decide to do with the proposition. But let's just say the voters approve Proposition 22. I would imagine the judges would go with the will of the people. If it fails, I imagine that they will go with the will of the people. Proposition 23 is the Dialysis Clinic Requirements Initiative. This one is very interesting, and we'll get into some of the details here. A yes vote on this proposition requires chronic dialysis clinics to have an on-site physician while patients are being treated, to report data on dialysis-related infections, obtain consent from the state health department before closing the clinic, and not discriminate against patients based on the source of payment for care. A no on this proposition keeps things the way that they are. It's important to note that in 2018, just a couple of years ago, we had a similar proposition on the ballot, Proposition 8. and Proposition 8 was defeated by 59.9% of the voters. That proposition was a little bit different in the sense that it required dialysis clinics to issue refunds to patients or their insurance for profits above 115% of the cost of direct patient care and healthcare improvements. This has turned into similar to Prop 22, which had really strong opinions on both sides, labor and tech. This one is labor and the two largest dialysis clinics in California about patient care. And this is obviously a little bit different, so they're coming at it a little bit of a different way. There is conversation around whether or not this is I have to talk about what's in the public sphere, whether or not putting this back on the ballot after the very expensive war waged in 2018 is kind of a misuse of how the initiative process is supposed to go. We talked a lot about whether or not some of these things should go through the legislative process, which has more of a ability to hash out some of these disagreements. I think this falls into that category as something that would benefit from a lot more deliberation. And there is some ill feelings on both sides. People believe that this is basically SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, attempt to try to force DaVita and Fresenius Medical Care into unionizing. I don't know if that's true. I haven't been involved in that particular argument, but people believe that this is a labor versus business battle, and we'll see. I will say that, abdicating some of the responsibility of what dialysis clinics should and shouldn't be doing to actual voters, probably people who aren't using dialysis clinic, may not be the best way to actually get the appropriate patient care. But I think that we will have, there's a very expensive battle being waged right now. I believe right now it is pretty high up there as far as Proposition 8, I'm sorry, was one of the most expensive propositions, the top 6 since 1999. And I would imagine that this proposition currently 23 is going to be right up there. So we're going to have a lot of debate in the airwaves about this, and you'll hear a lot about it. It is, like I said, I think it is an end around the legislature, but I understand that folks feel strongly about it. I would, if you have and know someone who is on dialysis and you're close with them, I think for me, that would probably be the best source of whether or not those clinics or need reform and whether or not these reforms actually solve their problems. We talked a lot about earlier on whether or not these solutions that are presented before us that we can't change or modify or amend are actually going to solve the problems that they're designed to do. And so that puts a lot of weight on whether we vote yes or no on these. So I just encourage people to dig a little bit deeper, have some conversations. I think Mr. Bivens talked about voting. In order to educate ourselves to vote, we have to have conversations with our neighbors and our friends and our family about some of this stuff. And we got to talk about it. And sometimes that may be uncomfortable because their responses may not be how we feel, but that dialogue is important. I think we've gotten away from that over the last couple of decades or so. And we need to get back on that, because I think having a conversation about politics will hopefully help educate each other about where and how people view the world. That's just my little commentary. I am on the last proposition, which is Proposition 24.
23. I want to discuss 23 because I'm close to that proposition. I know someone personally, and one of the things on Proposition 23, because dialysis is most dialysis patients are mainly on Medicare or veteran benefits. And so there was a proposition on them trying to take the dialysis patients off of Medicare into that. So there's some argument as to really what this is really about. But there are doctors that do come on site there all the time. So we're trying to I know most of the dialysis patients are going for no that I know of. So they're trying to determine really what they're trying to get to. Are they trying to work around all the other propositions that have failed on doing this? This definitely does need deep diving into it. But right now, most of the dialysis patients I know, it's going to be a no vote for them because they feel like they will lose. They can't play with their lives. It's a life or death situation. One day without a clinic can mean life.
Yeah, and
So
I
anyway.
I would encourage people to take if you don't have dialysis, it is a very time-consuming procedure, and so it is something that affects people every day. A lot of these propositions affect all manner of Californians in different ways, but this is one that could, if it doesn't do what it says it's going to do, and there are unintended consequences, could actually have an impact on people's care. So I think it's very important that people take this one very seriously, because there are people that need these clinics, and we hope that an improvement doesn't mean that these close, if that's what ultimately this proposition is supposed to do if it passes. If it doesn't, then we have to figure out what the next steps are to ensure that, absent of this proposition, that people who are going to dialysis clinics are getting the appropriate care that they deserve. But thank you for that commentary. We really appreciate it. The last proposition is a round 2 on privacy. Proposition 24 is the Consumer Personal Information Law and Agency Initiative. A yes vote supports the ballot initiative to expand the state's consumer data privacy laws. It includes provisions to allow consumers to direct businesses to not share their personal information. It also removes the time period in which businesses can fix violations before being penalized. And it creates the Privacy Protection Agency to ensure that the state's consumer data privacy laws are followed. And the reason why I say this is around 2, because there was already a law that was passed just last year called CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, 2 years ago. And that had some provisions. The folks who were concerned about privacy felt like that was a great first step. They felt like more needed to be done. And so they put this proposition on the ballot. I think Alistair Battagart is the one who is behind the initial proposition in 2018 that was removed in order to have a law go through the legislature, which I think was an interesting scenario. We've never really seen anything like that in California. Unfortunately, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. We do, that has started to open up other industries and other potential folks to use the legislature as a leverage point to try to get things off and on the ballot. But you do need a substantial amount of resources to be able to pull that off. So it's not necessarily going to be a lot, duplicated a lot, but we do see people talking about having similar conversations. I think the biggest issue that people have a problem with this proposition is that it removes the ability of businesses to fix violations before being penalized. So now there is no grace period, if you will. If you are caught violating the privacy laws, then you will be fined and penalized for those violations. I think that's important. This proposition specifically does a number of things, and I will enumerate them here. It will prevent a business from not sharing a consumer's personal information upon the consumer's request. It provides consumers with an opt-out option for having their sensitive personal information. A business has to obtain permission before collecting data from consumers who are younger than 16. You also have to get permission from a parent and a guardian for collecting data from a consumer who is younger than 13. And then lastly, it allows a business to correct a consumer's inaccurate personal information upon their request. For those that were in favor of the proposition before, of the privacy, think this is a great, next step. Like I said, round 2, if you will. This one also creates a new agency. And I don't believe that it funds that agency, but it does create a California Privacy Protection Agency, so a regulatory body that it's going to be in charge of more than likely monitoring these businesses, ensuring that they're following the laws if this becomes the new state law, and then also fining or penalizing those businesses if they violate it. Some of the folks that are on the side of yes on 24, which is they are for this becoming the new law. You have Representative Ro Khanna, you have Senator Ben Allen, State Senator Nancy Skinner, State Senator Robert Hertzberg, a former presidential candidate Andrew Yang. You also have the California Professional Firefighters, AFSCME, and State Building Trades, the NAACP State Conference, and Common Sense, which is an organization for advocating for consumers' rights. On the no side, folks that do not want this to become law, it's interesting. You have Dolores Huerta, co-founder of the United Farm Workers, California Nurses Association, League of Women Voters, as well as the ACLU of California and of Northern California. And so the question on this one is whether or not you think that California needs more protection in its privacy rights, that businesses can do more, or do you feel like what we have in place and the things that we've enacted since 2018 are enough? So those are the propositions. I appreciate the opportunity. Open it up for questions. I'll try to answer them as best I can. I hope that this, at the very least, sparks some interest in folks taking a deeper dive on some of these things. It's a lot of issues to get involved in, but hopefully on ones that you that may have sparked an interest that either you care about or a family member or someone you know, that you take a deeper dive as you get your ballots delivered by mail this election. I think everyone is doing that and turning those ballots in. Again, regardless of your political ideology, I encourage everyone to vote. And I encourage everyone to turn their ballots in as soon as possible, just to ensure that they are counted and counted early. We know, and we talked about this in my opening, one of the reasons why Senator Galgiani ended up winning in 2012 was because late ballots were counted. We found out that we won by 1% the day before Thanksgiving, which, as you can imagine, is a couple of weeks from Election Day. On Election Day, we were actually losing by, I want to say 10 points or so, percentage points. And when I called the registrar's office the next day, that Wednesday morning, there was almost, not quite, but almost 1 million ballots left to count. And it took them 2 weeks in both counties in San Joaquin and Stanislaus to count all of those ballots. And eventually we were able to become victorious. So in order to avoid some of that and to help the election offices process these ballots, early, if you can get them in before, and a lot of those ballots are ballots that are dropped off on the day of election, which is a large number of people, as you can imagine, people unsure whether or not they voted, people voting provisionally. So if you get them in early, you get counted, and then whatever results are posted on Election Day, you are in that number. So I encourage people to vote, encourage everyone to vote, encourage everyone to turn their ballot in as quickly as possible. And I look forward to hearing and seeing how these propositions do. And we look forward to coming back again. And I want to thank Mr. Bivens for the invitation. I hope everyone got something out of this. Thank you, Bobby.
Mr. Lawson, did you do Proposition 25? Oh, did he do Proposition 25?
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay, I missed it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Evan, you want to take this in of it, or shall I go ahead?
Sure, I'll jump in and I'll turn it right back to you. But we want to thank our presenter, Mr. Lawson, for coming in. Once again, he comes in every proposition time and gives some profound updates. And thank you for your time, for your service to the community, and for educating us here in San Joaquin County so that we can become more informed voters. And we're looking forward to taking this information and discussing that with our family members, with folks in our church, with folks in our community centers, so that we can help to increase our voter knowledge here in our area. I want to briefly share for everyone on the everyone here about an exciting event we have coming up next. Our next event as Naacp, we have a chance to hear from the candidates who are running for local office. And that's going to be on October the 14th and 15th. October 14th, we'll hear from the candidates for State Assembly, State Senate, and for the 2 local congressional seats. And on October the 15th, we're going to have all the school board races starting at 2 p.m. And then starting at 5 p.m., we're going to have the debates for Stockton City Council, but also for Stockton Mayor, as well as Tracy Mayor. And so we're looking forward to you guys coming out. You'll see this emailed to you as well, an invite for our next major event, which is coming forward. Please do tell your family and friends as you're spreading word about about the propositions that we have on the ballot as well. Just one more announcement, ballots. You should have them in the mail right now, currently, or coming to your address soon. If you do not get your ballot over the course of this week, you want to check with the registrar of voters to make sure that they have your correct address. And they're located right downtown, 401 North San Joaquin Street. Again, thank you, Mr. Lawson, for all the work that you do. I want to turn it back over to Bobby Bivens, president of the Stockton branch in the Naacp.
I want to make one little correction, and thank you for that announcement, Evan. It's extremely important, and please share the information with your friends, your family, so you can get a look at these candidates that are running for office. The Register of Voters office, however, is not 401 North San Joaquin Street. That is our office address, and the register is on.
Wrong block, same street, wrong block, my fault.
Well,
I'll put in the chat box the address.
Yeah, thank you very much for doing that, Evan, because we don't want folks coming to our office thinking they're coming to the registrar. Secondly, I'd like to make an announcement, and if Dee Dee's able to, if you'll put it up on the screen for me, and if you're not, just shake your head. I can't. There we go. Is on the Community Health Forum, which quite frankly will be the first activity we'll have next week, which will be on this coming Monday at 8:30 a.m. And this event is hosted by the California Health Leadership Council and the Stockton Branch NAACP. We will have speaker Dr. Carmina Jones. She's an MD, MPhD, and a physician. This event will be by Zoom. The link is on the bottom of the announcement. And this is addressing health inequities, not just from Stockton or San Joaquin County, but also Stanislaus County. And we're looking forward to reaching out to people all over California and to people across the country. This discussion is extremely important because we know that our constituents and our family members are not getting the medical treatment that they need, have not historically been getting the medical treatment that they need. And we will be having hospital administrators, doctors, nurses, care providers, through the SEIU, the home care providers. Everyone is invited to this event, and it's a free event. And so we are looking forward to this event taking place, and it's going to be intense. And Dr. Jones is an extraordinary individual that will bring forth education and information and dialogue regarding health disparities in our country and in our community specifically. So please tune in if you can, join it. There's a registration, and we will be sending it out, and also I believe it's posted on our website and or our Facebook page for your information. Tell all your friends, tell everybody you know. This is extremely, extremely important. We will also have local panelists in addition to Dr. Jones addressing issues here in our community related to health disparities and why we're having this forum and how we can go about eliminating people losing their lives or limbs because of how they're being viewed. Somebody just tried to attack us. So I see a little red line through there. I hope you all see it, but at any rate, we will continue on. So that announcement is there. Please check your emails, look for our announcement. And with that, I want to also make the announcement of NAACP memberships. And there's a membership app. It is $NAACP Stockton. And you can purchase your membership or renew your membership. Annual memberships are $30 a year. I would suggest that you get the best deal and get a life membership, which is $750, of which you can pay $75 a year over a 10-year period if you choose to. But we suggest that you do it as quick and get it out the way and be a part of this organization that is fighting and working hard to eliminate all types of disparities within our community. So with that, I thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our team that worked the background tonight, and that's DeAndrea Davey, Najee Zarif, and Brandon Thorne. So thank you all very, very much. Register early for the candidate town hall. We're looking for a major turnout, and we're looking to have a great couple of debates next week to help us decipher who should be running our city and who should be sitting on the council to work with that. So thank you. Unless there are any announcements at this point, we again will, it is recorded, we will post it so that anyone and everyone that was not able to be here tonight can look at it, and it'll be up until at least election day. So thank you. With that, I will ask Reverend Green to give us a closing prayer, and I would ask the executive team members to stay on the line for just a few moments after this event is over. Thank you all. Thank you all for attending. Thanks again, Thomas. And if anybody wants to use his political services, I will tell you he's an excellent political consultant, and maybe you can type your information in there in the chat where they can get it and use you. I recommend him. He's not just a friend, but he's a great political consultant. So a lot of people want to run, a lot of people want information. This is the man to get that from. So it's right there on the screen there, and you can write it down. Contact Mr. Thomas Lawson. Thank you. So with that, I agree.
Let us pray. Most gracious and eternal God, we thank you once again for Mr. Lawson, who took the time out to share with us on today. We thank you for those who have took the time out of their busy schedule to come and be a part of this discussion. And we pray, God, that you continue to go with us, that we'll take the agenda and what we have learned, that we'll go forward and move forward with it. And we just thank you, Lord, for the things that you have done for us, and want to thank you in advance for what you're going to do for us in the future. We pray, God, that as we dismiss from this meeting, that you will go with each and every one of us and protect us and keep us in your care. For us in the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Sorry about the noise in the background. It's a motorcycle.
Sorry, we didn't hear it. We heard prayer.
Okay.
We were focused on prayer. All right, thank you all. Good night. And again, thank you for being with us. And that's the